And now, let me invite to the floor Ruth DeFries, professor of Columbia University in New York, professor of sustainability and ecology, and co-founding dean of the Columbia Climate School. Thank you, Ruth, for being with us.
Greetings, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to kick off this most important gathering. Thanks to all of you for being part of this growing community to work together for the flourishing of human life and all life and the future of our planet. I'd like to share with you some thinking today about how we can achieve that flourishing. We live in some dark times. Let's not despair. We have a lot of intelligences. We have the animate intelligence, ancestral intelligence, artificial intelligence. What I'd like to talk about in my few minutes here is how all of these intelligences are working together and converging on the same principles that can make us resilient and adaptive. So, starting with animate intelligence, the wisest, the most experienced, the most intelligent of all, because there have been many opportunities for life on Earth to learn. Over 3 billion years of learning. So there is so much intelligence, and we'll hear about that throughout this afternoon, about how much we can learn from nature and intelligence. Ancestral intelligence, also very smart, has been with us since modern humans, about 300,000 years. So there has also been a lot of time for ancestral intelligence to learn some of the lessons that animate intelligence have learned over billions of years. And then we have artificial intelligence, the baby, the infant. A lot to learn if we think about artificial intelligence, so young, the steam engine, a few hundred, 300 or so years ago. Computers, less than a century. So there's so much for artificial intelligence to learn. And I think, I often get accused of being an optimist, that artificial intelligence will learn the lessons that animate intelligence and ancestral intelligence have learned over such a long time span. So, animate intelligence. Why is it so intelligent? Because nature and the planet and life has experienced a lot of calamities. Wild swings in temperature, extinctions, destructions of ecosystems, disease, meteors crashing into the planet, a lot of challenges to life. So for life to survive, has to be adaptive, has to be resilient, otherwise it would not be here. It would have blinked out a long time ago. So nature, animate intelligence, has developed a set of operating principles that enable that resilience. And the other types of intelligence are, I think, learning those same operating principles, those same strategies. So I'd like to share some of those operating principles with you, and we can think together how we can learn from those principles and apply them in our human civilization, in our work to maintain life on Earth. So one of the very important operating principles of nature is redundancy. This is somewhat the opposite of efficiency. Our modern world is so organized around efficiency and maximization, but nature and life on Earth tells us something quite different. So if we think about the ginkgo leaf is in the history of the evolution of trees, one of the very early trees. And if you look at how the leaf veins are organized in a ginkgo leaf, they radiate out from the stem. Very efficient, nice way to get the water and the sugars and transport system within the leaf, which is the lifeblood for plants with leaves. Evolution learned that maybe there are better ways. If that leaf gets a tear, if an insect takes a bite out of that leaf, that transport system kind of breaks down. So evolution is brilliant and came up with these loopy-veined leaves. If you look at leaves today, you'll see a lot of redundancy in the way these leaf veins are organized. And that is because if there's some damage to some part in the leaf, there's always a different route. Like when you're stuck in traffic, you can find a different route. And that principle of redundancy, we are learning over and over in our human systems. One of my favorite stories in the book is the story of Paul Barron, who was tasked with advising the U.S. military during the Cold War on the structure for the communication system. And he, after thinking about this, advised to have a distributed system for the communication network. He was laughed out of the room. He was thrown out. But over time, what people learned is that having that distributed system, which is resilient against attack, because if there's an attack on one node, there are other ways for the communication network to operate, learned that that really is the most resilient way to go forward, like a loopy-veined leaf. And that is and became the concept behind the internet. We would not have the internet as we think about it today without this kind of distributed, loopy-veined network. And we see what happens when we don't use redundancy as a principle, when you have so much of the world's energy supply going through a tiny, narrow strait, and we see what has happened to the economy. So we hear now in the mainstream a lot more about redundancy in energy systems, redundancy in global supply chains. We heard that after COVID with building redundancy into the supply chains of all the materials that were not moving around the world. So we're learning this. Ancestral or animate intelligence teaches us about the importance of redundancy, and we're learning that lesson over and over. And the more calamities that we go through, the more we will learn that lesson in our modern systems. Another operating principle is how to recover from a crash. How to self-regulate, how to self-control, how to not have to wait for somebody far away to turn a switch to be able to fix a problem. The Earth system has beautiful self-regulatory mechanisms. Our climate is regulated by the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the way that CO2 interacts between volcanoes and the atmosphere and gets back into the surface of the Earth is a gorgeous self-regulating system. If it's too hot, CO2 is taken out. If it's too cold, CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. Keeps our climate within bounds, unlike our neighboring planets who have much more wild swings in climate than the Earth has. So beautiful self-regulatory mechanisms in our bodies right now. All of you have self-regulation going on in your bodies. Hormones, regulation of blood sugar with insulin. All of these self-regulating mechanisms have evolved over time. In ancestral intelligence, there is a lot of principles of self-regulation. One example is through the use of fire and the self-regulating process through which allowing fires to burn keeps big fires from having a lot of damage and building up the fuel load. So this is a principle that mainstream fire science has now taken on in a very big way with fires in Australia, North America, here in the Mediterranean, that allowing fires to burn keeps bigger fires under control. Decades ago, it wouldn't have been conceivable that fire managers would be looking to indigenous knowledge and ancestral wisdom as a way to manage fires, but that is actually happening. The biggest self-regulation of all in our cultural, political, social systems is democracy. Here we are. It's so inspiring to be where we are today in the birthplace of democracy. And sometimes it works. And we hope it works often. And we've seen how democracy and elections can self-regulate when a system is getting out of control and there is elites and takeover of the system, that the people's voice can self-regulate. And I have to acknowledge the beautiful people of Minneapolis, if you follow that story, and self-regulated in a very wonderful way to drive out the immigration agents who were illegally detaining people and killing citizens, and they self-regulated. They organized and they drove them out, the beautiful people of Minneapolis. So self-regulation, very important operating principle that we learn from nature. Then there's diversity, the hallmark of ecological systems and the hallmark of nature. Diversity, so important. Why would evolution invest in having so many species? It doesn't seem very efficient, but nature has shown us that this is the way to survive. This is the way to adapt when there is a calamity. There are so many species because when one goes extinct or conditions change, then there's another species that can take its place and carry on with a functioning ecosystem. And we'll probably hear a lot more about that this afternoon. So diversity is fundamentally important. The finance world has long ago learned that lesson with diversified portfolios, as you'll hear any financial manager recommend that you have a diversified portfolio. So that lesson from nature has become very embedded in the finance world. But ancestral intelligence also values diversity. I'm showing you here on your right a picture from a community seed bank in India where I work. And these women maintain this community seed bank with a diversity of crop species which are rapidly disappearing from their landscapes. And they understand instinctively, intuitively, how important it is to keep that diversity alive. Because they've seen when there's a dry year or a wet year or something, conditions change, that diversity is very, very useful to be able to keep options open. In the world of agricultural science, more and more, the mainstream is recognizing how important this genetic diversity is, how important it is to keep these neglected species alive and available for us to learn from, for us to breed traits into crops that are vulnerable to climate change. there's been a lot of change and learning in the agricultural world, almost mainstream. I wouldn't say it's quite there yet, but how important diversity is. Our food system is so reliant on just a handful of species. We're very, very vulnerable. And this learning from nature, the value of diversity, even though it doesn't seem very efficient, the value of keeping that diversity is becoming more and more ingrained in the understanding about what we need for the future. Finally, this idea that we learn from nature is that solutions come from the ground up. You will not see anywhere in nature a management plan or some top-down decision or some predetermined design. This is so prevalent through nature, like queen bees. Queen bees sounds like they're the queen and they should know what's going on. Well, they actually don't. They don't know what all the worker bees are knowing. They don't have any way to know, and they certainly don't have any way to direct the worker bees to do their work and tell which worker bee to do what. The worker bees are making decisions based on their local surroundings, based on what they see around them, following their pheromones, and that's what makes the beehive function. It's not that the queen is directing them. Think about zebra stripes. There's no predetermined pattern of zebra stripes. They emerge because embryonic cells follow a set of decision rules based on their surroundings, and a cell has no idea, if a cell can have an idea, that they're part of a big pattern. They're just following their rules, and what emerges from that is a pattern of zebra stripes. So we've learned this lesson. Elinor Ostrom, the famous economist, political scientist, had so many examples of this, where people self-organize very effectively, if conditions are right, to manage themselves from the ground on up, based on their local understanding of their condition. And what I'm showing you here on your right again is from the landscape where I work in India, where there was a massive program for everyone to have latrines, toilets. Everybody should have a latrine on their property in the villages. And there was big investment, very effective rollout to build these latrines in pretty much every house. You see them all over. Are they used? Have I ever seen one single one of those latrines actually being used for a latrine? Never. They're used as storage units. Great storage units. The issue is that there was no input from the people about how they wanted those latrines to be designed. So they're all exactly the same. They all have tin roofs, which are way too hot, doors which are way too narrow, not the way people would design if they were designing for themselves. And what you end up in, it's a very top-down, very effective implementation of a top-down strategy, and it's really not achieving its objective. So we learn from nature about how solutions really come from local, ground-up understanding of what's going on the ground, the people on the ground, or the cells in the zebra stripes, or the worker bees, being able to observe their local surroundings and then act accordingly. So I would say that all of these three intelligences are working together. It's not that one is better than the other or one is more intelligent than the other. It's that animate intelligence has had so long to learn and has been through so many shocks and so many opportunities to learn. And the more that ancestral intelligence has developed so many of these same principles from animate intelligence, and the more shocks we go through, the more even artificial intelligence will learn that these operating principles are the ones that can help us flourish, that can provide a set of strategies that humans can flourish and all life can flourish. It's really the only way to follow these operating principles. So over time, I will submit to you that these three types of artificial intelligences that we're discussing in this conference will all merge together over time with enough opportunity to learn, enough opportunity to experience what actually makes systems flourish, sustainable, resilient, and adaptive. And these principles apply to all kinds of systems, whether it's natural systems, ecosystems, cultural systems, financial systems, economics, whatever the complex system is, these same principles apply, and we are learning more and more, and we will continue to learn from these principles. So I'm so looking forward to this afternoon, where we'll discuss animate intelligence, and tomorrow when we'll discuss the other kinds of intelligences. And let's think together about how they all work together. They're not siloed. These are intelligences which learn from each other. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the rest of the afternoon.